Today we're going to talk about some of the most underrated and some of the most overrated places in the entire world. And it's a really important video. I want you to watch the whole video. And what we're going to do is we're going to examine past data, because that's how we draw conclusions. That's how we come up with effective reasoning, because that's important, right? We don't just make emotional decisions. We actually look at the past, and history doesn't always repeat itself. History often rhymes, right? Often rhymes. Let's talk about what happened during COVID, because I think that's a deciding factor. I wanted to welcome you to Nomad Elite, where we help investors, digital nomads, entrepreneurs, expats, families, remote workers move to countries where they are treated well. Where they don't experience xenophobic behavior, because that happens in certain regions of this planet, right? And where they can obtain residence permits and citizenships, right? Let's talk about what happened now during the pandemic, something really, really important. And it's crazy how some people tend to forget what happened during the pandemic, as if it never happened. But the pandemic proved to us how certain countries, and especially certain regions, behave under pressure. And I think pressure is the best test. If somebody behaves poorly under pressure, probably wouldn't hire them, right? Especially if it's in a customer care representative position. Just giving an example, right? And you wouldn't move to a country that won't allow you to enter during an emergency situation like a pandemic. And we have seen this happening during the pandemic in places such as Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Taiwan. I mean, we're talking pretty much about all of Southeast Asia with very few exceptions. And I think the fact that not even permanent residents, not even their own citizens were allowed to enter into the countries they are supposed to enter, because they have a long-term pass or they're citizens, yet they were prohibited from entering the country. I think that taught us a lot about etiquette, but not just about that. It taught us a lot about empathy. So many people, I probably want to say hundreds of thousands of people were stranded. Possibly more than hundreds of thousands were stranded overseas, right? They were begging to get back with their families, yet they couldn't because certain governments did not allow them to. And I'm very BS intolerant. I don't tolerate BS. And it doesn't matter what happened before the pandemic. Like I said, there's nothing better. There's no better test than a pandemic. There's no better test than war. There's no better test than a really difficult situation, because from that test, you gain so much useful data that you can apply to pretty much any area of your life. And I'm pretty disappointed with how Southeast Asia handled the pandemic, which is not something that many people talk about. People were not allowed to enter. They were prohibited from entering the countries, and people are going back there. I'm never going back there. I'm just done. Because if we're friends and I can't be on your side when you're not feeling good, when you're down, then I'm not a true friend. If I can only be with you, if I'm only gonna have your back in good times, not bad times, then what kind of a friend am I to you? A lousy friend, right? A bad friend, an untrustworthy friend. A friend that lacks empathy. And that's what we have seen happening during the pandemic. So I won't be donating a penny to Southeast Asian governments anytime soon. I'm tired of them. And now what we're seeing, about laws being created in many different places, anti-foreigner laws, I just don't think that those places deserve the amount of traffic, right? The amount of traction that they've been generating. And I don't think things will continue to work out well for certain countries, because people ain't stupid. Some people don't care, the younger people that don't have kids, that they're just in the mood of traveling, that just want to have a good time. Look, I'm not denying that there are many people who have serious ties to Southeast Asia, and that's why they want to stay there. And that's perfectly fine. Look, if I were to be in a relationship with a Southeast Asian woman, and if I were to have kids with that woman, right, then that would be a different story, then I'd need to make some sacrifices. But I'm not talking to people who don't have serious ties to Southeast Asia, no properties, no serious investments, which you shouldn't have anyway, because they're going to take it away from you sooner rather than later. Then I think you probably want to look elsewhere. And like I said, the pandemic was the best test. And a country that did not allow permanent residents to enter, a country that did not allow its own citizens to enter, a country that applied ridiculously prolonged lockdowns for pretty much nothing other than suppressing people, right? I don't think a country like that is worth visiting, is worth spending time in. No matter how cheap it is, no matter how beautiful the women are. I know that's the biggest argument that people make, the slim women, you know. Well, there's slim women everywhere, my friend. It doesn't need to be Southeast Asia. But what we have learned is that Latin America excelled big time. Latin America has proven empathy, has proven liberty, and Latin America has proven to be a solid base for somebody during an emergency situation. Latin America is not xenophobic like Southeast Asia. Latin America issues permanent residency. Latin America issues citizenship. Latin America gives you civil rights, just like you do back home if you're from a Western country, right? It's a good deal. It's a good value deal. And I could argue, well, what we have seen in terms of crimes, and look, I mean, there are beautiful places that have very low crime rates, and those are the places you gotta pick. And Eastern Europe now, so I think Latin America is underrated. I definitely believe that Southeast Asia is overrated because of all the xenophobia, and I experienced a lot. I mean, as a white Western man, I was racially profiled in Southeast Asia, not once, multiple times. I remember when I tried to fight a dispute I had with my landlord in Vietnam. I tried to fight it, and I tried to, file a claim with the government agency in Ho Chi Minh City, but they told me, we ain't helping you. You foreigner, we ain't helping you against the local. We ain't helping you, even though the local was at fault. They kicked me out of the apartment for no reason, kept my deposit, and left me stranded. And the government agency, the government office there, they said, no, we aren't helping you. And the apartment was under my name. So I learned from my past mistakes. And I ain't making those mistakes again. Meaning, I ain't trusting in certain countries as much anymore. Because life is all about trust. And how do you prove trust? Well, performance, my friend. Performance. Repetition. So that's what I think about that. Eastern Europe allowed permanent residents and citizens to enter even during a pandemic. Yeah, you needed a test, and some countries required, I believe, vaccines for a very limited time, but I don't even think that would need to go back and look at each country individually. With a test, you were almost always allowed in if you had that in place. So, Eastern Europe was great during the pandemic as well. It was not as great as Latin America, but it was still pretty good. And so I think those places deserve more credit. Now, if we take a look at Africa, very interesting place that I personally need to learn much more about myself. I like Morocco. I think it's fantastic. I have a relative who worked for the United Nations, and he spent a lot of time in Tanzania and got a lot of interesting stories to tell about Tanzania. Perhaps in the future, he's willing to share one of his stories on this channel. I'm sure you guys would appreciate that. But I think Africa is very interesting and not really talked about at all. It deserves more credit. But I just look at, underrated countries, overrated countries. I would also take a look at Chinese influence, because that's a big deciding factor. A big deciding factor. Do you want to be in a country that's been overrun by the Chinese Communist Party? I don't. I'm gonna post an article underneath this video. Just take a look at the description on how China opened up over 100 police stations worldwide to harass their own citizens. So that is something that I would watch out for. But I would just generally say that Eastern Europe, Africa, Latin America are great places. And I know it's not perhaps as identical as the Orient, as the Far East, and it shouldn't be. Places are different, and places have different values. And that's why we're doing now more videos on the 20 aspects that I consider to be important when moving to a new country. So I recommend you to watch those videos. I think Southeast Asia is fantastic, low cost of living, but Southeast Asia is great, low cost of living, many networking opportunities, warm weather, if that's important to you, beautiful beaches, right? The food is interesting, very healthy in certain countries. So I definitely think that Southeast Asia has a lot of value, but I also think that you have to be aware of the downsides, just as there are downsides in Eastern Europe, like the weather is not that great, that certain cities are pretty old, know, they have this old communist feel to them. So those are some of the downsides of living in Eastern Europe, right? Racism can be an issue too, depending on what country you're in. And yeah, the weather definitely an issue. Latin America, safety can be an issue. So you really gotta know the area and, you know, research and pick carefully. And there are plenty of places to choose from. Just gotta do your homework, just like in school. Gotta do your homework. Let's be more specific. What are some of the more underrated places in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, in Africa, and maybe even Asia? I want to hear your opinion. I want to hear your thoughts. So please take a couple of seconds, couple of minutes, depending on how long your comment will be. Comment below. Let us know.